we have, luckily we at IE Canada, many of our members are also represent other associations. So we're certainly starting to craft probably a little better briefing note than what and usually happens. Obviously, when you talk to the bureaucrats.
Before we get started with the show, here's a quick word from our sponsor, Global Training Center. As trade compliance professionals, you want to make sure that your procedures and documentation are completed as correctly as possible to avoid any delays and possible fines. We provide a range of trade compliance courses that will fit your needs. From in-person or web training to recorded on-demand courses, we can train one or even thousands on your team through your learning platform or on our portal. We can even customize a private session for your team. Go to globaltrainingcenter.com to find out more.
Hey folks, we're back for another show of Simply Trade. And in our podcast, we are so thankful for your listenership. Again, you hear me say that almost every single time, and it is trending up like gangbusters. We have doubled the number of downloads, or should I say, y'all have doubled the number of downloads in less than 4 months time frame. We hit our 10,000 downloads, and now we are double that on a monthly basis. So thank you for that. And it's growing and expanding, and we are getting more and more followers. So my goodness, that's great. With that, we're going to have a great show today because we're going to get to talk about our northern partner of trading partner up in Canada today, Lalo. And with that, it's like there's some fond memories I have from having the opportunity to work in Canada. But before we go any further, how are you handling the heat down there in Texas? It's still hot, isn't it?
It is. As we record this, it's well after Labor Day, and we're still well over 100 degrees. So yeah, so we're still there. And I thought, again, as we're recording this, I thought we'd go to nicer, cooler weather. We're heading out to San Antonio for a trade conference this weekend for ACPA, and I thought that was going to be the case, that we'll be a little cooler, and that's not the case. It's just as bad, and with 100% humidity, which I'm going into worst heat, I guess. But yeah, and then I was just talking to Kim before we came on. She's heading to Miami. She's going to the best place. She's going to a conference out in Miami. We'll talk a little bit about that with her. But anyway, so why don't you introduce her, since you know Kim, and you introduced her to me at GTech, in fact. And so let's go ahead and bring her on.
Well, we're bringing on for today's guest, Kim Campbell. She is somebody that I've had the privilege of knowing for, I don't know, probably 20 years now, if not more. And Kim used to be with Canadian Customs, was a supervisor there, and that's how we actually first met. Is she was actually one of the supervisors that managed the customs folks that were in the sort operations that I was managing up there at the time. Tough as nails, and I will say she did not pull any punches. And at the same time, we had a great working relationship with her and her colleagues. And we have a several mutual friends, but the port directors have just been phenomenal. Marvin Goodman and Murray Urin and just several. It's just so some great folks. But Kim has since left Customs and is ventured out on with her own consulting firm, and is well respected in the industry. So, Kim Campbell, thank you for being a guest on our show, and welcome.
My gosh, I'm so excited. For those that have heard me blather on for years that I really want to do a podcast, I am so happy that this is my inaugural one with you both.
In Oklahoma City, when I met you, and you were so like bubbly and everything. I was like, oh, we definitely need to have Kim on the show. I was so excited to have, I know our schedules kind of got in the way and everything, but I'm glad you're on now. So Kim, thank you for coming on.
My pleasure. Especially when we're going to talk about some of my favorite things, including a 4-letter word that we all love in Canada called CARM.
CARM, yes. It's like, all right, so CARM, was it, what's CARM stand for? I know it's...
Gosh, I probably should have been even I'm trying to block the words. I think it's officially called Customs Agency Revenue Management System. So actually, probably should look it up as we speak. That's terrible. I can't believe I've been at almost 20 years that word, and I still stumble over it a little bit.
In a world driven by innovation and global connectivity, there's one name that stands out above the rest: Schultz Trade Law. With over 30 years providing legal and consulting services to Fortune 500 companies, Schultz Trade Law knows the challenges that businesses face in navigating the complex landscape of international trade. The legal and regulatory hurdles can impede growth and drain resources. But fear not, because Schultz Trade Law has the solution. At Schultz Trade Law, they've harnessed their vast knowledge of real-world trade challenges and legal expertise to create a seamless experience for businesses engaged in international trade. Their team of legal experts know how to streamline import and export compliance, resolve trade disputes, and optimize global supply chain operations. Learn more at schultztradelaw.com, where legal expertise leads the way to global success.
Yeah, I just Googled it, but I know it's not. It's not this one. It says Christian Apologetics and Research Ministry.
Well, we do need some divine intervention, so maybe that was appropriate.
Hey, to our Canadian listeners up there, I hope you're laughing through this, because I know there has been some frustrations, some angst, whatever's going on with this. So it's like, if you can't laugh, you'll be crying. So hopefully we can get a chuckle here or whatever.
So it actually means CBSA, assessment and revenue management.
Sorry,
So,
what was I saying?
yeah.
Agency assessment and revenue management.
Assessment
Thank
and
you.
revenue management. Yes.
Well, anyone that knows me is going to really laugh that I couldn't even riff off what it was. So that's great.
Oh my goodness. Well, as we're going in this is so what's the latest on CARM? CARM was part of the scenario where there was some automated release of things that actually, when I was up there, we were taking advantage of, and it wasn't really called CARM then; it was called something else, but it was part of the same technology.
Well, I can certainly jump in. I guess, first of all, just before we really get rolling, obviously the conversation we have today are the views of myself and not any of the organizations that I affiliate myself with, because obviously we want to have an open and fun conversation today. So really, this has been an ongoing legacy, and it really was part of what their modernization agenda has been for a long time. And of course, we applaud them on that. We've been wanting them to modernize on so many different fronts. This really was supposed to be the back end system, which you guys know on your side of the fence in the United States is the 7501s. Because that system, which Andy, if you remember, was the KDEX system, how we account for our goods, that thing's been around for over 40 years, and for sure it has to be sunset. It's sitting on technology that's not supported anymore, like everyone goes through legacy old technology. So of course we as trade have been embracing and wanting to move forward, because we still have a lot of processes, like other countries do, that are paper. So, of course, we were always promised, like, for example, the post-summary adjustments or corrections that you have in the U.S., we still have to do those all paper. So that obviously is going to be one huge benefit. And again, very much we were excited about all of that. And, we still will be excited to get those new benefits and privileges. Unfortunately, this initiative was started in 2011. And customs will probably not tell you it started then. In their minds, it started in 2018, because that's kind of the year they got a lot of funding. But it was supposed to be in 2 years after that. And here we are now in 2023 with things still not going to be implemented. In all fairness, we've had one piece of some of that was implemented a few years ago, which is called the ARL system. The accounting ledger system, receivables ledger system. Believe it or not, Canada didn't have those things in place. So that was, a big jump, and that was kind of early phases of CARM. But I have to be honest with you, we're still living through the outfall of that. And that went in 2016, and there's still those books and records are not properly reconciled, despite industry's best efforts to try and get customs to get it to the table and clean it up. We still haven't been quite successful. So we have that backdrop that we still have to deal with. So CARM was now the full-on piece of that. It was to replace, and will be to replace, the existing B3 and that technology. And then, of course, adding additional new things by being able to do your adjustments electronically. All great stuff. Some of the early benefits that people can enjoy right now is importers now can see their own statement of accounts. And this is a big win for importers because they've kind of been a little bit blind in some ways because they've had to always rely on the books and records of their customs brokers, which, that has worked very well for many, many years. But I think generally importers just wanted to be able to see what their state of affairs with customs were. And so that's a big win, obviously. And that's in place now. If people want to sign on now, they'd be able to see that. Very bare bones technology in there, or I shouldn't say technology, information in there. They can also now pay directly, which is great. Now we have different payment methods, credit cards, all kinds of cool stuff, which I think the US is still trying to automate or think about maybe an ACE 2.0. And so that those pieces are in and have been working for a couple of years now. So that's all great. Where it gets dicey, though, and this is what people are really frustrated about and still not sure about, is this full implementation that now again has been pushed out. We officially got the word, I feel like 2 or 3 weeks ago, that the next, and I just call it target dates now, the next target date is May 2024. So we knew in May that we weren't going to make the October date, even though customs had been insisting they would. We knew that because, and this is part of what we talk about here, Andy, in terms of we're here, what's going on up there with that CARM thing. For those of us that have been participating and we were initially and could lean in a little more to test, we're discovering, from our perspective, we do not believe the system is ready. Now, the government will say it is ready, but it's not behaving properly. And why this is such a concern for us? Well, obvious reasons. One, we want it to work, but two, this is really one of the biggest pieces of CARM that I think is maybe not discussed enough or importers are aware of enough. And it's of no fault of their own. It's just customs isn't really frank enough about it. And that is customs. And as far as we know, we will be the first country in the world that customs will actually be making the duties and tax calculations. So today we send in the data and we say, here's what we owe you. Tomorrow we'll be sending in the data minus, what we owe, and customs will make the calculation and say, here's what you owe. All the testing that's gone on to date, this critical piece, we do not see that as performing properly. So in other words, it will overcalculate or undercalculate. And when I say over and under, I'm not talking a couple cents. I'm talking tens of thousands of dollars. So per transaction. So we keep pushing them on this. They keep claiming that the system is working. But what they have recently conceded is that there's a number of tables in there that I guess they didn't have people updating the tables. So I don't understand, from my perspective, again, been at it for like 6-7 years, why we can't seem to solve that little single problem. So that just gives you one little insight into the problem, some of the challenges that we're seeing.
All right, so let's back up here. First off, just for some of our listeners that this may be a little bit different for you, Kim made reference to the B3. That's the equivalent of the 7501. The B3 is the entry data that goes into Canada customs. The other, though, is as you're talking through this, it seems like customs is taking with this new enhancements of their systems, is taking on the scenario here of actually calculating, using the information that's transmitted to them and then calculating, if you will, in the entry and in the assessment, versus allowing the broker to calculate it, do the things in their system, and then transmit the final product in that. So it's like the government has taken on a function or functionality that has not been done before in the past. As such, there's also, in my opinion, it would be that the government's taken on a risk here. And, if it calculates something and it calculates incorrectly, as you just said, or whatever, um, who's going to hold the government accountable on this? And that's one of the problems. They're going to take their stand, and then you have to, as a importer, if it's wrong, go through all kinds of bureaucratic crap to try and get that corrected. Is what it sounds like to me.
This is our biggest fear. Well, I wouldn't say our biggest fear. One of our biggest fears, for sure, Andy. And this is the other part of the CARM story. We still, after I don't know, 6 years, where we've been really full time at the table. When I say full time at the table, for about 2 years, we had trade chain partners monthly, sometimes numerous days in person, like working through all the things that we needed to do before we could go live. Most of those things still haven't been done. So just what you talked through right there, we desperately need to know from them what is going to happen when we get into these exact scenarios that you just laid out, that there is a miscalculation and there's no way the importer should have to pay. The flip side of that is the undercalculations. It's like, okay, well, you, the government, you're now responsible for the calculations. If you undercalculated, what's the ramification to the importer? We can't get them to sit down and have a conversation like that, nor can we get them to put anything in writing in terms of how that's going to look and feel. So that is why we still, even though we've got this little bit of a reprieve here by not going in October, unfortunately, though, we've wasted many, many months. They in June when they finally conceded it, there really has been zero interaction with the trade chain partners. So even though we know that, okay, great, let's catch our breath in October, all this stuff that you just talked about, Andy, has to be done before we can go live, which now is May. So we've already lost almost 4 critical months of preparation and working together to figure all this stuff out.
That is really a shame. And then the scenario there is, it appears, if let me kind of recap it here. It appears that those that are running this project within the government are not really, I guess, in alignment with the private sector here on this. And as such, the private sector sounds like you're trying to offer suggestions, work through some things, but it's, um, how do you talk to somebody that's not willing to respond to you? Is that pretty fair?
Well, if you could answer that question for me, maybe I would have some breakthrough.
Well, I would say at this point, I think the industry is going to have to step back, and this would be one of those, like, as a oh my gosh, stop and think if this is really going to be able to happen. But I think the brokerage industry, along with the express carriers, which has a huge volume, are going to have to join forces along with importers, like i.e. Canada and whomever else in the trade associations, to be able to get in there and pull in the politicians that have oversight of Revenue Canada, along with whomever else, in my opinion, to try and say, hey, what's um, get them to the table, I guess, is what part of that
Yeah,
scenario
no,
is.
we would 100% agree with your thinking there. And so what I can offer up is that has happened numerous times since 2018. We've had to come together as coalition. And there's quite a few of us. We probably haven't had our full coalition thinking about this until very recently again. And we're certainly starting to have those discussions because we 100% agree with you. Part of the challenge has been that when you talk about the leadership on this project, I think I'm on my fourth executive president in since 2018. So, and I've kind of, although I shouldn't say I've lost count, there's definitely been more than 3 that are managing the project. And quite honestly, I'm not sure who it is anymore. We've had some significant change even in the last few weeks. So this is part of the legacy story with CARM. And so the coalition has definitely done exactly what you've said. We've seen the results of that being obviously delayed because we knew they weren't ready, but we also felt there was some leadership changes, which we of course leaned into and applauded. In my opinion, I feel like the executive team is pretty stable, but they've been there for a while. And my expectation or my hope is that maybe they were dealing with some other issues to try and get the technical piece stabilized, and then hopefully they'll be coming out of the gate here very quickly to deal with the other pieces. But it's still a lot of daunting work, and we've lost years of potential activity because the project just wasn't organized and was continually turning over leadership. So definitely right now, we do have a new minister of public safety in Canada. So we are the coalition is starting to come back together, and we are hoping to brief the new minister, shortly on the state of affairs. And also, we will probably be asking for some of his help to step in and maybe provide a little more oversight because we feel that's part of the story too.
Okay, with that, let's look at, because I would imagine there are a lot of brokers, and the Brokers Association are probably really more attuned to this than some of the importers. But what would be some of the actions that importers in Canada, non-resident importers, U.S. and Canada have huge trade transactions, and so I know there's a lot of non-resident importers from the U.S. that should be getting involved in this. What would be some of the things that you would like to suggest to, try and, influence people, either, if you're for the technology or against or whatever? I mean, it's something that needs to happen. I agree. But what would be some of the actions you would like to see people get involved with to try and get folks to the table to resolve these issues?
So to resolve the issues, probably again to your point, Andy, we need some a coalition. I can tell you right now, IE Canada has started that conversation, and we're certainly expanding into other associations. And we have, luckily, we at IE Canada, we many of our members are also represent other associations. So we're certainly starting to craft probably a little better briefing note than what and usually happens. Obviously, when you talk to the bureaucrats, it's very technical, but when you speak to other folks, you need to have something a little more, high level that can lay out what the issues are, but also the asks. So that's something that we're brushing up on right now. But so I guess my recommendation for anybody that's an NRI, and Andy, I'm glad you raised that, because that's one thing I hear as I'm out talking about CARM, is a lot of people think they're exempt if they're non-resident importer. So it definitely applies to anyone that's importing anything into Canada for sure. You will be part of this new program, and we'll have to lean in and number one, sign up and get into the portal. That would be one of the first things that non-residents could do. Again, Andy, I agree. Highly recommend them to reach out to their customs brokers and service providers. I can tell you, even from a freight perspective, freight forwarders need to keep their eye on the prize too, because there is implications to release, which maybe we can flesh out a little bit, because that's the other big part. We're very focused on the accounting, but unfortunately, what Customs decided to do is make a big policy change around bonds or having security at the border. In Canada right now, most things come in on a customs broker bond. Right now, based on what we know, when it goes live on one magical day, again, we're not going to be rolling this out, over a period of time. It's going to be one magical day in May. This is all going to kick in. Importers, whether you're a resident or non-resident, are going to have your own account security, or what the U.S. calls surety. In Canada, we also have many other options. It doesn't just have to be a surety bond. There's other instruments you could use as well. But the bottom line, you will have to get those. Luckily, okay, here was a breakthrough thanks to some lobbying that Andy just talked about. Our coalition work, they have finally, I would say in the last 8 months or so, conceded that they can't insist everyone has a bond day one, because they will shut the border down. So what the concession is, and we expect to see, is there will be a 6-month grace period once it goes live. But the details of that and how that's all going to look and feel are completely unknown to us still, which is very scary, because one day you'll talk to them and say, we'll have a grace period. Next day they'll say, well, you only have a grace period if you have a portal account. So it's just not clear. The other thing I will let you know is their fallback answer, which is the scariest part to me, is there is a very old archaic service option, which basically means you have to account and pay for your goods at the border. So this is what they're suggesting is going to happen. So if they just can't, in my opinion, can't land that way, or we literally will shut the border down over the next few months.
Let's take that for the stop for a second. All right, folks, as you're listening to this, and again, if you're a U.S. Carrier, if you're especially if you're a U.S. Truck carrier, the independent truckers and stuff, you've got the importers, exporters, all this coming into play. Is you could have a truck that, let's say, it's full of small packages, it's full of LTL, and out of everything in there, you could have one pallet, let's say on an LTL, that doesn't meet the criteria for this CARM situation and the bond situation. And that whole truck could be held up for that one pallet is what's going to happen, because it's not going to be moved in bond and whatever. It's going to be, you have to do it, based on what I'm hearing. There's no provision for exceptions, and that's one of the downsides, that the people that it sounds like they're dealing with CARM from the government side, they're building the pathway for here's what's supposed to happen. It's like, great, don't have a problem with that, but you have exceptions. And in those exceptions, there's not a provision to say, well, how do you deal with it and deal with it timely? So, folks, this is one of those things that if your listeners from again, a Canadian importer, a U.S. or any other non-resident importer into Canada, this is some of the things you need to be getting involved with and taking a look at it. So I would say one of the things that may be an arsenal of some things, start looking at the new USMCA trade agreement and see if there's options there to raise up as a concern. Two, this ought to be an agenda item, believe it or not, for COAC and in the U.S. for U.S. CBP, because there's going to be an issue there of sharing information between Canada Customs and U.S. Customs back and forth. That's going to be detrimental here in the hang up of this. And three, the U.S. Trade Office, if you're involved in that, as well as the Canadian trade offices, that there's some things right there that comes into play. So.
No, you're 100% right. So I'm happy to say that I think USCBP, as they always do, I always look to them as my shining beacon of good ways to communicate and interact with trade to build collaborative solutions. I do actually sit on the sub working group that COAC set up. I feel like we're over a year ago now, just taking a look at the Chapter 7 USMCA. So obviously there are recommendations coming out. Angie, I know you're a former COAC person, so sitting under an NDA until they come out in a recommendation, obviously we have to be cautious of that. But we have got one out already, and we're hoping to have another one out. So for sure, that is on our radar. And for sure, we on the Canadian side are certainly briefing our ministers. But Andy, the other thing I will say is there was a really great coalition document that actually came out of some of the U.S. associations when President Biden came up recently to talk with our Prime Minister about trade, and actually called out CARM itself. So definitely we're pushing, but I need to push more, obviously.
And Kim, what about lessons learned? I mean, obviously, I don't know very much about Canada, but down here in the southern border, years past, did Canadian officials like look at what and maybe learn from lessons like when Mexico rolled out their unique window, the VUSEM or the Ventanilla Única, and then here in the U.S. with ACE, especially with Mexico, gosh, I remember I was in that business at that time and selling software that connected to that, and no, we can't cross anything. It's officially closed, and it was a mess, So, I mean, did they look at that? I mean, it sounds like they're almost repeating those mistakes. I don't know.
I wish I could tell you that the short answer is yes, they looked at those 100%. I'm not sure about the Mexican story, but I know for sure they definitely leaned in with the U.S., talked about ACE ad nauseum. I've heard about all the lessons that they learned from that, but unfortunately, we're doing exactly the same thing that U.S. did, but repeating it, the same problem. So, but haven't been able to write course. So, for example, what I will say to you is, of the other part of the CARM story is this whole initiative has been outsourced to a third party. So same, you guys went down that same path on the U.S. side, and then my understanding at some point the commissioner at the time just made the very tough decision, but seemed to be the very right decision to pull that back in and manage it within the U.S. CBP umbrella. This is I feel the same problem we have here, but they have not made the decision to do the same thing at this point, anyways.
Hey, listen, let's take a few minutes to talk. Let me shift gears on you. We're going to need to wrap this up, but it's last sale valuation versus first sale and all that kind of stuff. Canada is making a significant change in policy. Can you give people a quick update on it? Is it a policy that has been implemented, or is it being talked about, or what's going on regarding last sale valuation?
I would love to. So in my spare time outside of CARM, trying to make sure we don't blow up our economy. I'm also very passionate about this topic because I feel this will really add inflationary pressures into our market, could cause retaliation against us with some of our, our friends around the world, most specifically our amazing U.S. Friends. And also, I just don't even know how this is going to pan out in terms of how they would possibly enforce this thing. So let's break it down just slightly. So what ended up happening was, in the U.S. has adopted the same thing. In 2021, there was a global move to try and clarify when there's multi-sale transactions. Because there had obviously been this move afoot about first sale, and a lot of people using the first sale value to move goods across the border. So clearly governments would have issues with that. And I can see traders would have issues with that too, because some folks would be potentially claiming values much lower than they should be potentially. So there was a legislative change. Again, we weren't consulted as industry in Canada. It just went through in a budget bill, and I know the U.S. has similar things sometimes, where you get a nice surprise in some of those big budget bills because a bunch of legislation gets put in outside of just budget issues. And in Canada, that hasn't really happened on the customs file, but we've seen it a couple times recently, and I'm not going to lie, I don't like it at all. I think it's very not nice. So that happened in 2021. There was a legislative change to say that the valuation would be for last sale. What then has happened about 2 years ago, Customs came out with, again, the way they did it was not the usual rigor in terms of a fulsome notice about consultation about what they were thinking. But they did send it out, in all fairness to them. How they did it and where they put it, very obscure. And I have other issues about how governments, especially my government, Canada, publishes regulations. Like, you really have to be digging in the weeds to find out stuff, because there isn't a repeatable pattern that everyone can go and figure this stuff out. But i.e. Canada happened to see it, and we're very concerned at that point in time, and we put in a very fulsome submission. As a result, though, because my understanding, there was only 2 associations to put in a submission, of course, the one I was representing and still do at the time on this topic, we kept getting told we were the only ones that had a problem with it. So what then happened is we moved to what we call Gazette 1. And this is now the opportunity that the government says, hey, this is what we're thinking about doing. Please comment. And you have 30 days to do so. 2 things to talk about there. One is under CUSMA or USMCA, they're supposed to give us 60 days notice, but our regulator, for some reason on the CBSA side, for their pattern has been, even since that agreement's gone in, to give us less than 30 days in some cases, but not more than 30 days. So that's, we had to fight for that a little bit to get them to actually adhere to their own agreement. And so industry writ large, when we actually dug into it, what it does seem to indicate, as much as Customs says that's not their intention, is they would be looking at potentially a domestic sale. So, yeah. And as much as I keep saying, no, that's not, we're not. But 2 of the scenarios, if you're a crazy person like I am that follow this stuff, scenario 6 and 8 specifically say it would be the value of the domestic purchase. And so this is kind of the crux of it, Andy, I would say. And I think in their minds, they feel that maybe there's some big thing going on. The problem is, I feel like they've picked and choosed around the world things that they think will support their cause. First example is what you just talked about is first sale. So I, again, constantly as we have a conversation with them about, they're really on industry because they feel we're asking for first sale. So we've talked very recently about no. And by the way, because they also try and tell us this is a US thing only. And as you know, it is not. The US is the same last sale for export, but it's in the US, there are allowances for first sale, as you know, but they're very specific conditions and it has to be tied to the last sale. So here's where we are. They, again, just as recently as I think a week and a half ago, they again have tried to assure us that they are not going after domestic pricing. Haven't seen that in writing, so hopefully they will at least do that. But the other problem is, even if they're not going to do that, and this is what I think we really need to nail them down on, is if you're not going to go after, because really that regulation is kind of assumes, or I guess is suggesting that if they establish you got a non-resident importer transaction, they're going to dismiss the transaction value. And then, so now what? Number one, how can you? Number two, what value are you now going to use? So this is now where they're talking about all the other valuation methodologies would then kick into play, which is really frightening and ridiculous when you think about it. So you'd be maybe forced into computed, like the list goes on. So I can tell you they have made commitments to sit down and have a face-to-face and go through all their documentation, and if we can come to a common understanding. But really, I think the baseline issue is it's a multi-sale transaction. They're trying to give clarity to that, but they've just confused the heck out of it. And I'm not sure they understand what the rest of the world is doing. And I'm not sure that what they're suggesting is following trade agreements that we've already agreed to as a country, because again, they're picking and choosing what they want to really try and solidify that they want to go after non-resident importers and their valuation.
Well, let's stop for a second. Let me recap some things, because you've talked on a lot of things that are there, and I got to keep it simple because I'm not as smart as you are. So let me try and put.
Yeah, it's not that at all. It's just I'm too in the trenches with this stuff. You need to.
Well, let me pull it back up. So just let me give a scenario here. So with the issue, let's just say that Andy Shiles Incorporated is selling to Kim Campbell, and I have a widget that you're buying for, let's just say it's $2,000. All right. So as it comes across, and you're turning around now, and then you're going to sell it. You're buying it wholesale for me, and you're going to then turn around and sell it. Let's just say for $3,000. And so whatever machine or widget it is or whatever, so it comes in at 2,000. Then you have a domestic sale there in Canada where your end product is sold to a customer and for 3 grand. So the transaction there is you would be then in theory applying any local taxes, the GST and or PST for provincial sales tax.
And your profit, by the way.
Yeah, and the profit and all that all comes into play under you with the 3,000. That's fine. When it's imported, any duties and taxes would be paid off of the 2,000 off the wholesale transaction. What this new legislation is saying, oh no, wait a minute. It crosses the international border, comes in, and even though you're buying it for $2,000 from me, since the last sale, you would have to value that at $3,000 your end sales. So the question comes into play. Sounds like you would be paying duties and taxes based on the $3,000, but then what about the domestic transaction? Does that mean that's exempt from any PST, GST that's going to be put forward? I don't see that. I see with what I looked at, there's still going to be the expectation to charge PST, GST, and whatever taxes to your end customer. So it's like double taxation on the same transaction, and you're not getting the advantage of again, the profits, the wholesale price and all those kinds of things. Is that a good summary of what I just came up with?
Yeah, like I would suggest, Andy, most people are seeing some of those scenarios that they've laid out exactly how you've just described it. When we talk to customs, they just keep saying it's not our intent, but I, in some ways, I think it is their intent. They've been pretty frank about it. They feel that non-resident importers have a competitive advantage because they have a lower value and they don't have people and all those things that are in Canada. So
Wait a minute. I got to stop right there. See, that's to me, that's somebody that needs to go pound sand on what they're saying, because the scenario here, if I'm a non-resident importer and it's e-commerce and I'm selling now to, let's say in this case, I'm selling to you, Kim Campbell, and I'm selling the end price is all right. I'm selling it to you, let's say for $3,000. That is, I'm not going to import. I can't declare a lower rate because there's not it's not going to be a domestic transaction. It's a full international and in transaction there. So whatever my value I'm selling to you, it is what it is. Where this is going to cost Canadians a significant amount of money is there's a huge number of distributors in Canada. There's a huge number of wholesale warehouses that are selling to retail places, and all of that. It's just going to elevate the price that much more. So to me, it sounds like the Canadian government is doing nothing more than trying to do a revenue grab here. They're trying to increase revenue off of the backs of Canadian citizens. You could say all you want to say about non-resident importers, but quite frankly, this is on the backs of Canadian citizens.
you are 100% right, Andy. And, as much as CARM has been a thorn in everyone's side, I've never seen people come together in coalitions like I've just seen on this exact topic. So even like associations I didn't even really know about, we've found each other, and we're all seeing it exactly the same way you are. And so we continue to try and push forward to sit down and have those conversations with CBSA, obviously, initially, because they're the ones that own the regulation. But we are also working just to inform all the regulators, including our elected folks, because we have huge inflationary issues here in Canada, just like you do in the US. And this will only contribute. So not only is this one, but we just talked about people are going to have to get bonds at the border. There's going to be all kinds of new complication. So the cost now just getting goods across the border is just going to continue to go through the roof. And our governments are, keep saying to us that they're very focused on non-inflationary pressures, yet their actions are saying something else. So this is one for sure. We have a very good coalition that's come together. And we are continuing to have conversations with folks, not only at CBSA, but around the Hill as well.
Well, I will say we're going to need to wrap up here, but I got to say to our listeners again, this is something where it's a policy direction, if you will. It's obviously got pushed through from a legislative perspective. So, there's somebody in behind this or a group of people within the government that is pushing this and trying to look at it. So people's names need to be thrown out there to say, where's this coming from? Who sponsored the bill? And literally, you need to, take them on and hold them accountable. But all said and done, folks, you really need to be getting involved, especially from the Canadian side, but also the U.S. side as well as other countries. That this is something that I think that you get into some WTO type policy violations here on the World Trade Organization and several other fronts. So, all right. Well, listen, Kim, uh, Lila, we may need to break this one up into a couple of shows here because there's some good stuff here. And we're going to have to get in. Listen, if there are some more developments, we definitely want to have you back and on any of these fronts, the bonds, the CARM, the last sale type valuation and all that, and whatever can be done. But folks, I want to tell you, we're going to have Kim Campbell's contact information on with our show notes and whatnot. If you're interested in any of these issues, you definitely ought to look out and reach out to her. She can probably point you in the right directions. And if you're needing somebody to give you some advice on importing or exporting in and out of Canada, Kim is definitely a phenomenal resource for you. So, Kim, thank you so much for being on our show.
You and Lalo and Angie, thank you for getting me through my first podcast.
Nice.
It's so exciting.
Awesome. You did great.
Safe travels, you guys.
Thank you very much for joining us. Simply Trade is brought to you by the generous contributions of Global Training Center. You can follow the show and GTC on LinkedIn or Twitter and other social networks. Make sure you check out the show notes in the description for a full rundown of today's show with all the important links. Also, make sure that you share this with a friend and subscribe on your favorite streaming platform. We really like hearing from you. If you enjoyed the show, make sure to rate and review wherever you listen to this podcast. If you or someone you know would like to be a guest on the show or would like to sponsor Simply Trade or suggest any topic you would like for us to discuss, please contact us via email at simplytrade@globaltrainingcenter.com, or you can DM us on Twitter at simplytradepod. Thank you again for the privilege of your time. Happy trading. Simply Trade is not a law firm or an advisor. The topics and discussions conducted by Simply Trade hosts and guests should not be considered and is not intended to substitute legal advice. You should seek appropriate counsel for your own situations. These conversations and information are directed towards listeners in the United States for informational, educational, and entertainment purposes only and should not be substituted for legal advice. No listener or viewer of this podcast should act or refrain from acting on the basis of information on this podcast without first seeking legal advice from counsel. Information on this podcast may not be up to date depending on the time of publishing and the time of viewership. The content of this posting is provided as is. No representations are made that the content is error-free. The views expressed in or through this podcast are those of the individual speakers, not those of their respective employers or Global Training Center as a whole. All liability with respect to actions taken or not taken based on the contents of this podcast are hereby expressly disclaimed.